morning. Welcome. It's so good to be here with you on this brisk morning, not as brisk here in the foothills as it was on the mountain when I came down. For those of you who might be visiting or who haven't met me, my name is Beth Shore, and I serve as one of the co-contract ministers here. Let's get started with our chalice lighting.
Good morning. Tomorrow is the first day, is it on? No. No?
Yes, it's on.
Put it by your chin.
Oh,
Tomorrow is the first day of spring, and so my quotes have a little something to do about that. Spring unlocks the flowers to paint the laughing soil. If you've never been thrilled to the very edges of your soul by a flower in spring bloom, maybe your soul has never been in bloom. The promise of spring's arrival is enough to get anyone through the bitter winter. And is spring a season of new beginnings? Spring is considered to be the season of new beginnings and welcomes this change with nature, emerging from hibernation. This season brings new life to flowering plants, trees, and other vegetation.
thank you for your gifts. Annie, I lied. I said that there wasn't a reading, but there is a reading, if y'all could bear with me. It's actually from a hymn that's in our service. It's a poem, though. You don't have to open it. You don't have to open it. Sorry. I'm just going to read it. It's a poem by Langston Hughes. In time of silver rain, since, Christine, as you reminded us, tomorrow is the first day of spring. We did have some rain earlier this week. In time of silver rain, the earth puts forth new life again. Green grasses grow and flowers lift their heads. And all over the plain, the wonder spreads of life, of life, of life. In time of silver rain, the butterflies lift silken wings to catch a rainbow cry. And trees put forth new leaves to sing in joy beneath the sky. In time of silver rain, when spring and life are new. You'll bear with me here while I get organized. First, my printer did not work this morning, and then just a few minutes ago, as I was opening the sermon, I had an error message come across the screen that said, "Cannot find March 19, Power of Love." But no, it's okay, it's okay. It wasn't that organized to begin with, and lo and behold, it has just seen fit to rear its head. So I'm kind of excited about that. We Would Be One was the hymn that we just sang together. What does that mean, to be one? You know, of course, we know there's the marriage act, you know, two people become one, but obviously that's not what we mean here. We would be one as one community. And yet we all have our different views, drastically different backgrounds, different experiences. But of course we have our commonalities. No matter where we come from, or how we were raised, or what our ages are, we have a lot of similarities as one. When we say we will be one, it's about focusing on those similarities to help us grow and evolve as a group. What I wanted to talk about today, if you will indulge me, is about being wrong. Can we be wrong as one? No, it's not about that. It's not about us all being wrong. But here we have come together to be one, not to listen to my truth. I want to remind you that as Unitarian Universalists, we know that we do not come here to listen to the truth of what the preacher has to say, because it's very unlikely that that person has truth. But we come here to be reminded of what is important to us, to help stimulate our own thinking, to help us make sense of our day-to-day life, And we use this old format. It is a very Protestant format. But we have some songs and some poems, some hymns, some thoughts. But we share some things to remind ourselves that we would be one. To remind ourselves of our unity and our commonality. Because this life is a social enterprise. So my topic for today that I want to bring before you, share my musings with you, is about being wrong. Being wrong. Have you ever been wrong, any of you? I saw a hand go up. A very honest person there. And you know how the joke runs, I've been wrong once or twice. It's happened. What is it like to be wrong? Just blurt it out. What's your experience? What's it like to be wrong?
Humbling. Mad.
Humbling? Whatever?
Mad.
Mad. Angry. What else?
Embarrassing.
Disappointed.
Sad.
Sad.
Surprised.
Surprised. I like that. Sometimes that's not so bad, right? Oh, thank goodness I was wrong. Well, interestingly enough, and it's always really hard to get started on these sermons, is I come up with a good topic or what I think is going to be an interesting topic, and then I dig in a little deeper, and lo and behold, I find out that people have written entire books on the subject, long books, 400-page books. And, even if I was going to read all of that, it would be hopeless to try to share the wisdom of this woman, Catherine Schultz, with you in a 20-minute sermon. I promise it won't be much over that. And yet, it's very humbling. People like Catherine, who considers herself to be a wrongologist, have helped me to think a little bit deeper about this subject and why I wanted to bring it to you. Because there is this tension in our world these days, right? There's this tension between recognizing that we are wrong and fallible, but a society that really does not look so well on being wrong, right? How hard is it to admit when we're wrong? How easy and normal it is to be right. In fact, most of the time, Catherine here says, our experience is of being right. And that question that I started out asking you, have you ever been wrong, and what was that like to be wrong? That's actually the answers that you gave, humbling, angry, disappointed, all those things about being wrong. Those were not being wrong. Those were the experience of when you found out you were wrong. Because Catherine makes the point, Schultz makes the point, this wrongologist, that really being wrong feels like being right. So that's kind of a zinger, isn't it? Because as long as we don't know that we are wrong, or we don't recognize that we are in error, we think we're right. And funny enough, she gives this great little illustration of this Chinese character that she mistook for a very long time. She was on a road trip. She was in her youth. And she kept seeing this Chinese character on signs along the way. And she finally asked her friend who was driving, "What's the deal with that Chinese character? What does it mean?" Her friend turned and stared at her for a little while and then said, "Well, I think it means there's a picnic table ahead." Now, that's not such a consequential case of being wrong, is it? And yet, nevertheless, it's pretty embarrassing for her. Her friend laughed at her. And to this day, 30 years later, she remembers her shame at feeling wrong over such a simple, accepted everybody else knew this picture. It doesn't really feel good to be wrong. So apparently, the human mind will go to great lengths to demonstrate, once we have made up something, once we have a belief, we will go to great lengths to demonstrate that we are right. And anyway, I'm sorry, I left you hanging. You know, way back I said there was a tension in our world today. I think there's this tension between wanting to be right in society and our own feelings, our own shame, this misery of being wrong. Maybe it's from our schooling and getting red marks on our page. You know, it's much better to be right, right? You want to get 100% right. Yeah. There's that tension. And I don't know that it's newly understood, but it's certainly getting more and more attention in the field of organizational growth and human productivity about how important it is to be wrong. Isn't that weird? What do you mean it's important to be wrong? Well, the idea is that the only way that we understand something new, that we gain new knowledge, is through discovery of error, through discovery of wrongs. And put another way, you might say that belief, which is the acceptance that we're right? If I believe something, I know I'm right, is the enemy of new knowledge. If you're already believing something, if you know yourself to be right, how is there space to let anything else in? And so leadership development coaches and organizational gurus will say, no, we need to discover where we're wrong. We need to fail faster. We need to make it safe for people to take a risk. And instead of zeroing in, like, you're wrong, presenting people with all the evidence why they're wrong, making them feel ashamed that they couldn't figure out a stupid picnic table picture, encouraging them. Wow, what a creative mind you must have. Do you have a background in Chinese characters? What led you to that belief? Why do you think that? I don't know. But I feel it's a tension. I myself will go to great lengths to be right. I brought my husband here as a witness to that. That's what's going through his mind right now. And what is it that we will protect ourselves in this way? Like I said, maybe it's this early childhood schooling, you know. My mother talks about taking piano lessons when she was a child, and actually if she would hit a wrong note, she was wrong, her teacher would wrap her knuckles with a ruler. I see somebody else nodding. I'm so sorry that happened to you. It certainly traumatized my mother. She never touched the piano for as long as she lived after that, as far as I'm concerned, although she did make me take lessons with a different kind of teacher. I still didn't learn how to play very well. Anyway, but where was I? Being wrong, and this idea that we shame people for being wrong in our culture, don't we? The last thing that people want to be is wrong. And nevertheless, aren't we good at demonstrating our own rightness sometimes? And here's a potential chain of what we do. When we think we're right and somebody else is wrong, someone we disagree with strongly, well, first, we want to attack their wrongness with logic. Right? Well, excuse me, but I have the facts. The facts right here. Just look in my book and I will start showing you the facts. How many of you have tried that with people that disagree with you? Anybody? Does it work? It might work sometimes, depends on the subject. And I want to point out that we are talking about certain kinds of knowledge. I should back up and say we are not talking about procedural knowledge. We're not talking about knowing how to do something, knowing how to change a tire, knowing how to scramble eggs, right? We're talking about what philosophers call provisional knowledge. You know, the belief that something is a true statement. Right? And it does slide. They slide between each other. The belief that the sun does not circle around the earth, but rather the earth circles around the sun. Is that knowledge? Is that hard fact? I believe it's hard fact, but if I really, really, really look closely, I'm kind of accepting the evidence of other people. Because the evidence that I have is that the sun rises over there, and then it sets over there. Now, what I've learned and what I believe to be true is that we're spinning at, somebody help me out, what is it, 20,000 miles an hour or something through space? But my experiential knowledge says that I'm standing still. So even that hard fact, which I believe is a fact, and we're all in this room together, maybe believe that, nevertheless, might be open to a little bit of doubt. Might be open to a little bit of question. So anyway, procedural knowledge versus provisional knowledge. Provisional knowledge is about statements of beliefs that we really may not be able to prove ourselves. So we trot out, you know, the first thing we do, we encounter somebody who doesn't believe, and here's the evidence. You need to believe this because, you know, and they don't accept it. And then what happens? Where do we go? Where do we go with this person if we haven't given up already?
Anger.
We go to anger, right? We might go to anger. And you're right, then there's something, we start to question their capacities, don't we? That person's an idiot. We have all this smart information that I provided for them, and lo and behold, they didn't accept it. Well, they just must be stupid, or an idiot, or crazy, right? Them off.
Frustration.
Frustration, we go to frustration. And then there's a third place that we go. There's a third place that we go. I know I've gone there myself. That's the evil. They're not just crazy or stupid. They are downright evil. They accept another set of provisional facts than I do. They don't have the right information. They're idiots. And really, they're just evil. And does that create oneness or separation? Of course it creates separation. It's not easy. I wouldn't say it's easy. I certainly don't feel at one with everyone. But I aspire. And I think in Unitarian Universalism, this is what we do. We aspire. We have our 7 principles. I meant to pick up one of those cards on my way in because I'm not sure I can recite them all from heart. But I know a couple of them are very important here. And that first one is the inherent worth and dignity of all human beings. By the way, these 7 principles are at risk. The UUA is about to overturn them, so if anybody wants to talk to me about that afterward, I would love to talk with you about it because I do have some strong beliefs about it. But anyway, our first principle is the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Now, we don't know that that is true, but we accept that belief, and I think it's aspirational. And if I believe that everyone has inherent worth and dignity, I don't know how you square that with doesn't have ignorance, idiot, and evil. That creates a cognitive dissonance. And that's a whole other subject when we get into right and wrong. I'll return to that in just a second. But going back to our principles, the inherent worth and dignity, and then Sally, you've got it right there. Is it number 4? The individual search, free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Yeah, the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Giving everyone a license, not just me, not just the minister, not just the deacons and the helpers on Sunday mornings, not just the Sunday school teacher, but everyone. Everyone has their right to a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. And that means, by extension, we get to respect their free and responsible search for truth and meaning. So how can we encourage that? How do we best encourage the free and responsible search for truth and meaning among ourselves, among this world that we would be one with? Ignorant, idiot, evil. Doesn't do it. Well, maybe the first place to go is to just have a little bit of recognition about this issue of being right and the issues around being wrong. And what would the world be like if we could just be a little more wrong? If we could be okay with being wrong? There was that book many, many years ago, I'm okay, you're okay, right? And that was about acceptance. And why is it that some of these other people are wrong? Why are they so wrong? I'm sorry, I'm actually thinking about Michael Servetus, one of our first martyrs, the Unitarian martyr. You might remember the story of him. Michael Servetus was burned at the stake by John Calvin with his book strapped to his leg called On the Errors of the Trinity, because he thought that the Calvinists were wrong. He couldn't understand. He grew up in Spain. He was a very smart guy. He grew up in Spain. He also discovered the human circulatory system. But when he wasn't doing that, he was trying to figure out why it was that all those Muslims and Jews would not convert to Christianity under pain of death and torture by the Spanish Inquisition. Why wouldn't they do that once they had the threat of death and they had the right information? Why wouldn't you just realize that Christianity was the one true religion and get on with it? He was able to read the Bible, thanks to the printing press, started reading the Bible for himself, and realized, well, no wonder they have a different set of information. They've been reading the Bible, and they know that there is no Trinity in it. And they're confused, and how could they accept this? I better get to John Calvin and let him know this. So he wrote this whole book, and he tried to deliver it not once but twice to John Calvin. Was put in prison once and he escaped, and he came back, and John Calvin said, enough of you. Had him burned at the stake because he was wrong for saying that the Bible was wrong, or the Catholic Church's the Reformation Church's teachings were wrong. We will go to great lengths to protect our own sense of rightness and to make others be wrong. Interestingly enough, Servetus was willing to take that risk, to put his own truth out there, the truth that as he saw it. But I digress. How do we live in this world and make it safer to be wrong? How can we allow ourselves to be wrong? And what would be possible if we did? When you've been talking with other people, have you ever had the experience midway through the conversation that maybe they were on to something and you were a little bit wrong? If you've had that experience, you were probably listening to them. You were probably listening to them, and you found something in there that you agreed with. Most of the time, though, what do? We're not really listening as hard as we might. We're listening for that pause so that we can jump in and tell other people why it is that we're right. And it is important that we have our beliefs, right? It's important that we think logically and rationally. The problem is our brain tricks us into thinking our rational thinking is really rational thinking, when it's not. It's something that the wrongologists call motivated reasoning. Don't you like the sound of that? I have motivated reasoning. And our motivated reasoning often follows this trajectory of, we have this belief, and it might not even be a belief that we're aware of. We're not necessarily aware of our belief because they're just right. I don't see it as a belief. It's just how things is, how the world works. We have a belief, and then when we see the evidence that our belief is correct, we're like, yeah, see, that's right. It's exactly how it is. But what happens when we find evidence that we disagree with, or that counteracts our beliefs? Can we even see it? Or do we find a reason to say, no, that's not how it is? It doesn't fit in our box. And that leads to that thing about cognitive dissonance that I said earlier. We really don't like this sense of cognitive dissonance. It's a paradox, trying to hold two things in our mind at one time. I don't think if I should draw. I'm not going to draw it, I'm going to describe it. Has anybody ever heard of something called a Rubens vase? A Rubens vase is, you've seen a picture where it's in black and white, and the vase outline is like this. It kind of follows like this. And if you look at it, you either see like a big flower vase or an urn, or you might see the two profiles of faces facing each other, with the vase in the middle. And of course, you can't really see it both at the same time. Your brain, even very fast, will kind of be flipping back and forth. It's these two truths, perhaps equal, trying to hold them at the same time. And our brains really don't like this cognitive dissonance. So we decide that one is the right way, and we kick the other one out. In my own life, I've been trying to think about, well, what do I do with that? Because it does seem in many cases there might be one truth. And don't I have the real truth? Aren't I right? I mean, after all, I'm 50-something. It's worked for a long time. I must be right. But what if I don't have the whole truth? What if I don't quite have the whole truth? And one of the biggest instances in my life occurred in this, I don't know, it was 15 years ago. It's a family story. There's someone in my family who's, is a long story, but caused a lot of pain and suffering in my family. And, you know, it's not that I had no compassion, but the person had just written off. And I was at a conference, and I met somebody from my hometown. Somebody that I didn't know. We started talking about people that we knew from that same hometown. It turns out we had a few of the same acquaintances. And yeah, that person, you know, Jim Smith, really, really good guy. You know, Sandy Shelf, really, really great gal. But you know what? Who I really remember from growing up with? And dog, if they didn't mention that person in my family. And they said, Johnny Shore, I'll just make up a name. Johnny Shore really stood by me in my time of difficulty and helped me out. Mm-hmm. I think my mouth dropped open. It was all I could do. Now this is part of a much longer story about this person, and I won't say that they don't continue to wreak havoc in lives, haven't continued to wreak havoc. But what I got that day, it was one of those spear through the chest moments of how incomplete my own story was. And because I was willing to accept what this person said, I mean, it seemed like a nice enough person, and that they had had this experience. You know, they didn't know about all this other experience, but they knew their own experience with this person. And it had really helped them get through a time of grief and difficulty. I don't know, divorce. I can't quite remember what that part was. I'd like to say that I'm all the time very humble now. I'm not. But I'd like to think I'm pretty sure I'm a little bit more humble than I was. Because I'm reminded that I don't always, frequently, might not have the whole truth. But my brain, this big, smart brain of mine, will march on right ahead, telling me that I do, unless I pause once in a while. And it's hard in our culture, because we want to be right. I'm ashamed when I'm wrong, or when I find out I'm wrong. I feel bad when I get a comeuppance. I feel bad when I learn that I'm not as smart as I thought I was. On the other hand, thank goodness we have smart researchers and chronologists reminding us that the way that we learn new things is to accept that we're wrong. Accept that we might be wrong. Just crack the door open just a little bit. All that information that I wanted to give that person, that idiot, evil person, well, there might be some other book that they've been reading that I don't even know about. If I could crack that door just a little bit longer, maybe I'll make a space to move toward the oneness which we seek. To even move forward toward talking about why we see the world as we see the world. And to talk with others about how we might achieve the world that we want to see. And so that's why I titled this today, The Power to Be Wrong. You know, we think of there's power in being right. It's a very quick jump, right? From right to righteousness. What if there's power, a big power, in being wrong? It's not that we shouldn't share our information, share our reasoning, motivated or not. But what if in cracking the door we said, well, I could be wrong. I might be mistaken, but here's how it looks from here. It's a big job. We're up against a lot. We're up against a world of short attention spans, where it's easier to just shortcut and with a few characters write people out. Right? What if we took the time to say, I could be wrong. Here's how I see it. Here's why I see it this way. How do you see it? Probably takes another sermon or 2 or 6 to work on that. Because it's a deep-seated, it goes into our emotions about who we are. And are we safe? Are we okay if we're wrong? But I'd like to invite myself today and invite you to consider that if you're wrong, my goodness, what might we learn? What might be possible? So maybe there's an upside to that, a power in being wrong. And that's what I got.